The stars looked different from this far out. Jake Morrison stared through the transport window at the endless black space dotted with distant lights. He had been in the military for 12 years, a Navy SEAL for 8, but this mission felt wrong from the start. His gut was telling him something bad was coming. New Horizon was supposed to be a quiet colony on the edge of human space, just farmers and miners trying to make a living on a rock that barely had enough water, but intelligence reports said the Korvath were building something there. Something big. Jake's team was sent to find out what. The transport dropped them 10 miles from the target zone. 6 men, the best operators Earth had. They moved through the rocky terrain like ghosts, using the darkness and their training to stay invisible. Jake led from the front, his rifle ready, his senses sharp. Behind him came his team, men he trusted with his life. They reached the ridge overlooking the Korvath installation just before dawn. What they saw made Jake's blood run cold. It wasn't just a small outpost. It was a massive military base with ships, weapons, and thousands of soldiers. The Korvath were preparing for war. Jake whispered into his radio, reporting what they saw. Command needed to know about this. But as he spoke, something felt off. The air changed. A high-pitched whine started, growing louder. Then his head exploded with pain. Neural disruptors. The Korvath had found them. Jake tried to move, tried to fight, but his body wouldn't respond. He watched helplessly as his team dropped one by one. They never had a chance. The aliens had been waiting for them, hunting them like animals. Korvath soldiers appeared from everywhere. They were tall, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were hidden behind masks, but Jake could feel their satisfaction. They had caught the human scouts. Through the pain and the paralysis, Jake saw them execute his team. Quick shots to the head, no mercy. No hesitation, but they didn't kill Jake. They wanted him alive. Strong hands grabbed him and dragged him toward a waiting ship. He tried to resist, tried to fight back, but the neural weapon had fried his nervous system. All he could do was watch the bodies of his friends get smaller as they took him away. When Jake woke up, everything hurt. His head pounded. His muscles ached. He was in a cell made of strange crystal material that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air smelled wrong, like burnt metal and chemicals. He sat up slowly, checking himself for injuries. Bruises and cuts, but nothing broken. They had been careful with him. The door opened without warning. A Korvath officer walked in, flanked by 2 guards. The officer removed his helmet, revealing a face that looked almost reptilian. Cold eyes studied Jake like he was an interesting specimen in a lab. The officer spoke in perfect English. His name was Vrax, and he enjoyed explaining exactly how worthless humans were. Weak prey that only survived by hiding in their corner of space. Soft creatures with fragile bodies and primitive technology. Vrax said the Korvath had studied human soldiers from previous captures. They knew how humans thought, how they fought, and how they broke. Jake said nothing. He just watched and listened. Vrax seemed disappointed by the silence. He wanted fear, wanted begging. When he didn't get it, his mood turned darker. He told Jake what would happen next. Torture first to extract tactical information, then the arena, where Jake would fight for the entertainment of Korvath soldiers. When they got bored, they would kill him and mount his skull as a trophy. The guards threw Jake into a larger holding area with other prisoners. The space was huge, like a warehouse with cells lining the walls. Dozens of beings from different species huddled in groups or sat alone in defeat. Most looked broken, their eyes empty and hopeless. Jake found a corner and sat down, his mind already working. He counted guards, noted their patrol patterns, studied the cell doors. A Navy SEAL didn't give up just because the situation looked bad. Every problem had a solution. Every enemy had a weakness. He just needed to find it. A reptilian creature approached him carefully. The being was tall and muscular, covered in scales that shifted from green to brown. He introduced himself as Kale, a soldier from the Drex Confederation. Kale had been a prisoner for 3 months. He warned Jake about the arena fights, about the creatures they would force him to battle, about how no one survived more than a few matches. Another prisoner joined them, a female with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her name was Leora, and she was telepathic. She could sense emotions and surface thoughts. She told Jake that most prisoners lost hope within days. The Korvath were experts at breaking spirits. Resistance was pointless. Death was inevitable. Jake looked at them both and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was real. He told them he was a Navy SEAL from Earth. His job was doing impossible things. His training was surviving when everyone said he couldn't. and he wasn't planning to die in this place. Kale and Leora stared at him like he was crazy. They had never met anyone who reacted to capture with confidence. Most species accepted their fate when overwhelmed by superior force. It was logical. It was smart. Fighting when you couldn't win was foolish. But Jake wasn't most species. Humans had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars by refusing to accept death. His ancestors had hunted animals bigger and stronger than them by simply not giving up. They chased prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They fought battles against impossible odds and somehow won. That stubbornness, that absolute refusal to quit, was coded into Jake's DNA. 3 days later, they came for him. Guards grabbed Jake and dragged him through corridors filled with Korvath soldiers. They threw him into a massive arena with walls of the same crystal material as his cell. Thousands of aliens filled the stands above, cheering and shouting. They wanted blood. They wanted entertainment. They wanted to watch the weak human die. A gate opened on the opposite side of the arena. Something huge stepped out. The creature was 3 times Jake's size, covered in natural armor plating with claws that could cut through steel. It roared and the sound shook the arena. The crowd went wild with excitement. Jake had no weapons, no armor, no backup, just his training and his will to survive. The creature charged, moving fast despite its size. Jake dove to the side, rolling across the arena floor. The beast's claws missed him by inches, gouging deep marks in the crystal. The fight that followed was brutal and desperate. Jake used every trick he knew. He stayed mobile, never letting the creature pin him down. He studied its movements, looking for patterns and weaknesses. When it charged, he dodged. When it slashed, he ducked. He was smaller, faster, and smarter. The beast had armor everywhere except its joints. Jake spotted the weakness and focused his attacks there. He used broken pieces of crystal from the floor as weapons, stabbing at the soft tissue between the armor plates. The creature roared in pain and fury, but Jake didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Minutes felt like hours. Jake's body screamed for rest. His lungs burned. His muscles ached. But he pushed through the pain, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he had. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the creature stumbled. Jake saw his chance and took it. He drove a sharp crystal shard into the beast's neck joint, pushing it deep. The creature collapsed. The arena fell silent. Thousands of Korvath stared in disbelief at the small human standing over the dead beast, covered in blood and breathing hard. This wasn't supposed to happen. The human should have died quickly. Instead, he had won. Then someone in the crowd whispered a word. Others picked it up, passing it along like a dark rumor. Soon the entire arena echoed with it. The word wasn't spoken in fear yet, but in mockery. The Korvath thought it was funny, this little human who refused to die easily. They called him Reaper. They didn't know that name would soon make them afraid. The guards threw Jake back into the holding area. His body was covered in cuts and bruises, but he was alive. That simple fact seemed to disturb the other prisoners more than comfort them. Kale approached slowly, staring at Jake like he was seeing a ghost. Nobody survived their first arena fight. Nobody. The Korvath designed it that way. They picked creatures that were guaranteed to kill quickly, giving the crowd a brief but satisfying show. But Jake had not only survived, he had won. Kale had watched the entire fight on the viewing screens scattered throughout the holding area. Every prisoner had watched. Leora touched Jake's shoulder gently. Through her telepathy, she could sense something unusual about his mind. Most beings, when facing death, felt fear or resignation. Jake felt neither. Instead, his mind was calculating, analyzing, already planning for the next fight. She had never encountered anything like it. Over the next few weeks, Jake fought again and again. Each time the Korvath expected him to die. Each time he found a way to win. They sent bigger creatures. He used their size against them. They sent faster opponents. He outsmarted them. They sent pack hunters. He divided them and picked them off one by one. The name Reaper stopped being a joke. Guards started saying it with uncertainty. Some even seemed nervous when they came to collect him for fights. Jake noticed this and used it. Fear was a weapon, and he was learning to wield it against his captors. Between fights, Jake talked with the other prisoners. He learned about their species, their cultures, and their ways of fighting. Most interesting was how different they were from humans. The Drex, like Kale, fought with honor and direct confrontation. The Askari, like Leora, avoided violence entirely when possible. Other species had their own traditions and rules, but humans? Humans fought to win no matter what it took. Honor was nice, but survival was better. Jake explained this to the others during quiet moments. He told them about guerrilla warfare, about how weaker forces could defeat stronger ones through cleverness and determination. He spoke about ambushes, traps, and using the environment as a weapon. These concepts were strange to most prisoners. Their cultures taught them to fight fairly or not at all. Deception was dishonorable. Trickery was cowardly. Jake shook his head at this. His people had learned long ago that you can't eat honor when you're dead. You can't be noble when your species is extinct. Sometimes you had to fight dirty to survive. He started teaching them small things, how to read body language to predict what guards would do, how to hide extra food and save strength, how to communicate without speaking through taps on walls and subtle gestures. Slowly, a network formed among the prisoners. Those who still had hope began connecting, sharing information, preparing for something they couldn't quite name yet. Jake studied the ship constantly. Every time guards escorted him to the arena, he memorized corridors, noted security systems, and counted personnel. Every time he returned, he scratched tiny marks on his cell wall, creating a map only he could read. The Korvath thought he was just a fighter, good in the arena but harmless otherwise. They were wrong. Commander Vrax grew more frustrated with each of Jake's victories. The human was supposed to be broken by now, begging for mercy, giving up information about Earth's defenses. Instead, he was becoming a symbol of resistance. Other prisoners were looking at him with something Vrax hadn't seen in years: hope. Vrax decided to end this. He would throw Jake into an impossible situation, one where even the Reaper's tricks couldn't save him. He arranged for Jake to fight 3 Korvath warriors simultaneously. Not beasts or creatures, but trained soldiers with weapons and armor. The fight would be broadcast throughout the ship. Every Korvath would watch the human finally die. When they came for Jake, Kale grabbed his arm. The reptilian soldier's eyes were worried. He had seen the announcement. 3 Korvath warriors, full equipment. It was execution disguised as entertainment. Jake just smiled and told him not to worry. He had a plan. He always had a plan. The arena was packed. Every available Korvath came to watch. Even Vrax attended personally, wanting to see the moment when the Reaper fell. Jake was pushed into the arena wearing nothing but torn clothing. Across from him, 3 Korvath warriors entered, their armor gleaming, their weapons charged and ready. The warriors spread out, surrounding Jake. They moved with professional precision, cutting off escape routes and setting up crossfire positions. They had trained for combat their entire lives. Against them, Jake was just meat waiting to be cut down. But Jake had something they didn't. He had fought on Earth, where every predator wanted to kill him, where the weather itself tried to murder him, where humans had learned to survive through pure stubborn refusal to die. He had that knowledge, that experience, that genetic memory of a species that clawed its way to the top of the food chain through nothing but determination. The fight started. The warriors attacked together, coordinated and deadly. Jake didn't meet them head-on. Instead, he ran, drawing them after him. They chased, confident in their superiority. Jake led them in a circle around the arena, letting them think they were hurting him. Then he stopped suddenly and dropped to the ground. The warriors, running at full speed, couldn't stop in time. They collided with each other, their formation breaking. Jake was already moving, diving for the nearest warrior. He grabbed the alien's weapon arm and twisted hard, using leverage and surprise to wrench the energy rifle free. Now armed, Jake rolled away and fired. The energy bolt caught one warrior in the chest, penetrating his armor at close range. The Korvath fell, smoke rising from the wound. The other 2 warriors recovered quickly and split up, trying to flank Jake again. Jake kept moving, using the arena's pillars and obstacles for cover. He fired carefully, making each shot count. The warriors returned fire, their bolts scorching the crystal walls around him. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their warriors struggled against a single human with no training in their weapons. But Jake didn't need training. He understood the basic principle of aim and fire. More importantly, he understood psychology. He shouted insults in broken Korvath, words he had learned from listening to guards. He questioned their honor, their courage, their worth as warriors. It was a risky move, but it worked. One warrior, enraged by the insults, charged recklessly. Jake waited until the last second, then stepped aside and fired point-blank into the warrior's unprotected neck joint. The Korvath crashed to the ground, his own momentum working against him. Now it was one-on-one. The last warrior was more careful, more professional. He didn't let anger control him. He advanced slowly, forcing Jake into a corner. The warrior's rifle was still charged. Jake's rifle was empty, its energy cell depleted. Jake threw the empty rifle at the warrior's head. It was a desperate move, but it bought him a second. He charged forward, getting inside the warrior's guard before the alien could fire. They grappled strength against strength. The Korvath was bigger and stronger, but Jake was fighting for his life. Jake found a gap in the armor and drove his fingers into it, targeting nerves and soft tissue. The warrior screamed and stumbled. Jake didn't let up. He grabbed the warrior's helmet and twisted sharply, using techniques from his hand-to-hand combat training. Something cracked, and the warrior went limp. Jake stood alone in the arena, surrounded by 3 dead Korvath warriors. Blood covered him, mixing with sweat and dirt. He was exhausted, injured, barely able to stand, but he was alive. He had won again. The arena remained silent for a long moment. Then from the prisoner-holding areas a sound began. It started as a murmur, then grew louder. The prisoners were chanting, their voices joining together in a word that now meant something different than before. Reaper, Reaper, Reaper. It wasn't mockery anymore. It wasn't entertainment. It was recognition of something dangerous and unstoppable. The Korvath in the stands looked at each other with uncertainty. Some looked afraid. Vrax sat in his command box, his face twisted with rage and something else, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear. After the fight with the 3 warriors, everything changed. The guards no longer mocked Jake when they passed his cell. Instead, they watched him carefully, hands always on their weapons. The other prisoners looked at him differently too, not with pity or sympathy, but with something close to reverence. Jake knew this was his moment. If they were going to escape, it had to be now, while the Korvath were uncertain and the prisoners had hope. He gathered Kale, Leora, and a few others who still had fight left in them. They met in a corner of the holding area, pretending to rest while actually planning rebellion. Jake laid out his plan using scratches in the dirt. The security system had a weakness. Every shift change, there was a 3-minute window when the detention block sensors reset. During that time, they could move without triggering alarms. They would need to disable the guards quickly and silently, steal their weapons, and fight their way to the hangar bay. It was insane. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of plan that humans specialized in. Kale pointed out a dozen ways it could fail. Jake agreed with everyone but said they had to try anyway. Staying meant death in the arena one by one. At least fighting gave them a chance. Leora used her telepathy to scout ahead, sensing guard positions and patrol patterns. She had never used her abilities for violence before. Her people believed in peace and understanding, but Jake had shown her that sometimes survival required fighting back. She shared what she learned, mapping out the ship's layout in everyone's minds. They prepared in secret, exercising when guards weren't watching, building strength and coordination. Jake taught them techniques for close combat, showed them pressure points on Korvath bodies that Leora had identified through her telepathy. They practiced timing, communication, and teamwork. They became a unit. 3 days later, during the evening shift change, Jake put his plan into action. He pretended to collapse in his cell, clutching his chest like he was having a medical emergency. The guards, curious about the famous Reaper, came closer to investigate. It was their last mistake. Jake moved like lightning. His fist caught the first guard in the throat, crushing his windpipe before he could shout. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Kale was already there, his powerful hands breaking the alien's neck with a quick twist. They caught the falling bodies and dragged them into the cell, taking their weapons and key cards. The other prisoners watched in shock as Jake opened their cells one by one. Some were too broken to move, too defeated to believe escape was possible. Others stood up on shaking legs, ready to fight or die trying. Jake didn't force anyone. He just opened doors and moved on. 20 prisoners joined them. It wasn't many, but it was enough. They moved through the ship like shadows, using the corridors Jake had memorized during his trips to the arena. Leora guided them telepathically, warning them when guards were near. They avoided contact when possible, eliminated threats when necessary. The first alarm went off when they reached level 3. Someone had found the dead guards. Jake heard Vrax's voice over the ship's speakers, ordering all security to the detention block. They had minutes before the entire ship mobilized against them. Jake picked up the pace, leading them toward the armory. They needed more weapons if they were going to reach the hangar. The armory was guarded by 4 soldiers, but surprise was on Jake's side. His group hit them hard and fast, using tactics the Korvath had never encountered. Crossfire, flanking maneuvers, coordinated attacks. The guards fell before they knew what was happening. Inside the armory, they grabbed everything they could carry: energy rifles, grenades, armor pieces. Jake showed them how to use the weapons, explaining the basics in seconds. Point, aim, fire. Don't think about honor or fairness. Just survive. Now armed and dangerous, they pushed toward the hangar bay. Korvath troops poured into the corridors trying to stop them. Jake's group fought like demons. Every intersection became a battlefield. They used the ship's layout against the Korvath, creating bottlenecks and ambush points. The aliens had superior numbers and training, but they weren't prepared for guerrilla warfare. Some prisoners fell. A young female from a species Jake didn't recognize took a blast to the chest. A Drex warrior stayed behind to hold a corridor, buying them time with his life. Each loss hurt, but Jake couldn't stop. Stopping meant everyone died. He pushed forward, his stolen rifle blazing. They reached the hangar bay to find it heavily defended. Vrax had anticipated their destination. He stood in the center of the bay with a full security battalion, weapons trained on every entrance. It was a perfect defensive position. Attacking head-on would be suicide. Jake studied the situation quickly. The hangar had emergency systems, designed to prevent fires and explosions from spreading. Large vents in the ceiling, blast doors between sections, atmospheric controls. If he could trigger the emergency protocols, it would create chaos. The problem was the control panel was across the hangar, right in the middle of the killing zone. Kale saw where Jake was looking and grabbed his arm. It was a death run. Nobody could cross that distance under fire, but Jake just smiled grimly. He had made harder runs. He told Kale to get everyone ready to rush the shuttles the moment the chaos started. Don't wait for him. Just go. Before anyone could argue, Jake sprinted into the hangar. Energy bolts filled the air immediately, coming from every direction. Jake ran like his life depended on it because it did. He weaved and dodged, using instinct and luck to avoid the blasts. Some came so close he felt the heat on his skin. He used debris for cover, rolling behind cargo containers and maintenance equipment. He fired his rifle blindly as he ran, not aiming, just forcing the Korvath to keep their heads down. His legs burned. His lungs screamed. A bolt grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He kept running. Somehow, impossibly, he reached the control panel. His hands flew over the alien interface, remembering what he had learned from watching guards. He slammed the emergency override, triggering every safety system at once. Alarms blared. Blast doors started closing, cutting the hangar into sections. Atmospheric vents opened, creating violent winds that scattered troops and equipment. In the chaos, the prisoners rushed the shuttles. Kale led them, firing covering shots as they ran. Most made it to the ship, scrambling aboard. But Jake was trapped on the wrong side of a blast door, separated from safety. Vrax saw his chance and moved in for the kill. The Korvath commander was fast and skilled, fueled by rage and humiliation. He attacked with the electrified blade, trying to cut Jake down. Jake parried with his stolen rifle, but the weapon shattered under the impact. He stumbled backward, exhausted and wounded, with nowhere left to run. Vrax raised his blade for the killing blow. Then an energy blast caught him in the side, staggering him. Kale stood at the entrance of a shuttle, his rifle smoking. The reptilian warrior roared for Jake to move. Now, Jake ran. His body had nothing left, but he ran anyway. Vrax, recovering, screamed orders to his troops. Energy bolts chased Jake across the hangar floor. He dove through the shuttle door just as it closed. Kale grabbed him and dragged him further inside as the pilot launched the ship. The shuttles blasted out of the hangar, pursued by Korvath fighters. But they had a head start and knew the tricks Jake had taught them. They split up, used debris fields for cover, and pushed their stolen ships to the limit. One by one, they jumped to faster-than-light speeds, leaving their captors behind. Jake collapsed against the shuttle wall, his vision blurring. They had done it. They had actually done it. Something that had never been done before. They escaped from a Korvath warship. Leora knelt beside him, her telepathy checking his injuries. Kale stood at the viewport, watching the stars stretch past them. Around the shuttle, the other freed prisoners sat in stunned silence, unable to believe they were free. The Reaper had struck his greatest blow yet. And the galaxy would never be the same. The stolen shuttle limped into human space 3 days later. Its engines were damaged, its hull scarred from the escape, but it was still flying. When a United Earth Defense Force patrol intercepted them near Haven's Gate colony, Jake identified himself. The patrol captain's voice came back shocked and disbelieving. Commander Jake Morrison was supposed to be dead. They escorted the shuttle to the nearest military station. Word spread fast. A Navy SEAL had not only survived Korvath captivity, but had escaped with prisoners from multiple alien species. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of story that humanity needed to hear. Admiral Victoria Kane met Jake personally on the station's docking bay. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been fighting the Korvath for 5 years, losing more battles than she won. Now she stood before a man who had beaten them from the inside. Jake spent 2 days in debriefing, telling everything he knew. Ship layouts, security protocols, guard rotations, weapon types, tactical weaknesses. He had memorized it all, storing every detail like ammunition for a future fight. The intelligence officers couldn't believe the amount of information he provided. It was worth more than a dozen reconnaissance missions. But Jake wasn't interested in praise or medals. He wanted to go back. He wanted to hit the Korvath where it hurt. Use what he learned to make them pay. Admiral Kane saw the fire in his eyes and recognized it. She had felt the same way after losing her first command to a Korvath ambush. Meanwhile, Kyle and Leora shared their stories with their own people. Kale returned to the Drex Confederation and stood before their military council. He told them about the human called Reaper, about tactics and strategies they had never imagined. The Drex were warriors who valued strength and honor, but Kale explained that humans valued something more important: victory. Leora went to the Ascari Collective and opened her mind to their elders. She let them see her memories, feel what she had felt. They saw Jake's determination, his refusal to surrender, and the deep well of human history that shaped him. They saw wars lasting generations, civilizations rising from ashes, and a species that simply would not die. The Ascari, who prided themselves on understanding others, realized they had badly misunderstood humanity. Word spread through the galaxy. The story of the Reaper became legend. Some species dismissed it as propaganda. Others listened carefully and started reconsidering their opinion of humans. The Korvath tried to suppress the story, but they couldn't stop it. Their own soldiers whispered it in fearful tones. Commander Vrax survived the escape, but his career was destroyed. In Korvath culture, letting prisoners escape was the ultimate failure. He was stripped of his rank and assigned to a border patrol vessel, far from the centers of power. But Vrax couldn't accept this humiliation. The human had ruined him, and Vrax would have his revenge. He began studying human history obsessively. He read about their wars, their tactics, their psychology. He learned about guerrilla warfare, insurgencies, and asymmetric combat. He assembled a special team of Korvath hunters, training them specifically to counter human tricks. Next time he would be ready. Admiral Kane called Jake to her office 6 weeks after his return. She had a proposal. The military wanted to create a special operations unit, led by Jake, focused on deep strikes against Korvath targets. They would use his intelligence and tactics to hit the enemy where they were vulnerable. She offered him command of this new unit. Jake accepted immediately. He chose the unit's name himself. Task Force Reaper. If the Korvath were going to fear that name, he would give them good reason. He recruited carefully, looking for operators who could think creatively and adapt quickly. He found Sophie Grant, a combat medic and sniper who had survived 3 impossible missions. He recruited Alex Briggs, a demolitions expert who could make explosives from spare parts. And Carlos Mendez joined, a tactical genius known for winning fights he should have lost. Kale and Leora asked to join the team. Kyle wanted to keep fighting alongside the human who had saved his life. Leora wanted to use her telepathy to help prevent others from suffering as they had. Jake welcomed them both. Task Force Reaper became the first truly mixed-species special operations unit in the war. Their first mission was a Korvath supply depot that supported enemy operations in 3 sectors. The depot was heavily defended with shield generators, automated turrets, and a full garrison. A conventional attack would cost hundreds of lives and might still fail. Jake had a better idea. They disguised themselves as prisoners being transported for detention. Jake had learned that the Korvath transported captives in special containers that security rarely inspected closely. It was a vulnerability born from arrogance. The Korvath couldn't imagine prisoners being dangerous. The transport ship was allowed through the depot's shields without question. Once inside, Task Force Reaper broke out of the containers and struck. They moved through the depot like ghosts, placing explosives on critical systems. Sophie provided overwatch, her sniper rifle taking out sentries silently. Alex rigged the ammunition storage with charges set to chain reaction. Carlos coordinated their movements, ensuring they stayed ahead of security. They were in and out in 30 minutes. The Korvath didn't even know they had been infiltrated until the depot exploded. The blast was visible from orbit, destroying months' worth of supplies and equipment. 0 casualties for Task Force Reaper. The Korvath couldn't understand how it had happened. More missions followed. A communications hub sabotaged, cutting off an entire battle group. A fuel depot destroyed, stranding a Korvath fleet. A command center infiltrated, its files copied before anyone noticed. Each operation was surgical, precise, and devastating. The Korvath started calling these attacks the work of the Reaper, not knowing it was actually an entire unit. Jake's tactics spread through human military. Officers studied his methods, incorporated his strategies into their training. Recruitment for special operations units increased dramatically. Soldiers wanted to be like the Reaper, to prove that humans could stand against any threat. The Drex Confederation and Askari Collective began changing their military doctrines too. They saw the effectiveness of human tactics and adapted them to their own forces. It was the beginning of a shift in how warfare was conducted in the galaxy. Korvath soldiers started showing signs of stress. They feared detention facilities might be infiltrated. They looked over their shoulders in their own bases. Some reported seeing the Reaper in shadows, a phantom that struck without warning and disappeared without trace. Command tried to dismiss these reports as hysteria, but the fear was real. After 6 months of operations, Task Force Reaper had conducted 27 missions without a single failure. They had destroyed enough Korvath infrastructure to slow the Empire's expansion significantly. Jake became more than a soldier. He became a symbol of human resistance, proof that Earth's people could fight back and win. But Jake knew the real war was just beginning. Task Force Reaper could win tactical victories, but the Korvath Empire was vast and powerful. They needed something bigger, a blow that would force the Korvath to take humanity seriously. He started planning, using all the intelligence he had gathered, looking for that one perfect target. Unknown to Jake, Vrax was planning too. The former commander had finally located Task Force Reaper's base of operations. He assembled a fleet and a team of elite hunters. He would capture the Reaper alive this time, break him publicly and restore his honor. Vrax didn't know he was about to start the battle that would change everything. The name Reaper echoed across the stars now, carried by whispers and rumors. To humans, it was hope. To the Korvath, it was fear. To Jake, it was just a reminder of what he had survived and what he still needed to do. The galaxy was learning a lesson that Earth had known for millennia. You could cage a human, torture a human, try to break a human, but you would never ever make them give up. That stubbornness, that refusal to quit, was humanity's greatest weapon, and the Reaper was about to teach that lesson one more time. The warning came at midnight. Intelligence had picked up Korvath fleet movements heading toward Echo Station, Task Force Reaper's remote outpost. Vrax had found them. Jake stood in the command center, studying the tactical display. 3 warships, 24 fighters, and a full assault battalion. They had maybe 4 hours before the attack began. Evacuation was impossible. They didn't have enough ships, and the Korvath would intercept them before they could jump to faster-than-light speeds. They would have to make a stand here, outnumbered 50-1. Sophie checked her sniper rifle one more time. Alex started rigging explosives throughout the station. Carlos coordinated defensive positions with the calm of a man who had faced death before. Kale stood beside Jake, studying the enemy formation. The reptilian warrior had fought countless battles, but never against odds this bad. He asked Jake if they had any chance of survival. Jake smiled grimly and said they always had a chance. Humans specialized in impossible situations. Leora reached out with her telepathy, touching the minds of everyone in the station. She shared Jake's confidence, his determination, his absolute refusal to give up. The other operators felt it and drew strength from it. If the Reaper wasn't afraid, neither were they. The Korvath arrived precisely on schedule. Their ships dropped into normal space and immediately launched fighters. Vrax's voice came over all frequencies, demanding Jake's surrender. He promised the others would be allowed to leave if Jake gave himself up. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Jake's response was short and clear. "Come and take me." The Korvath fleet opened fire, their weapons hammering Echo Station's shields. The battle had begun. The first assault wave hit the station's docking bay. Korvath soldiers poured through the breached doors expecting quick victory. Instead, they ran into a kill zone. Sophie's sniper fire dropped commanders instantly. Alex's explosives turned corridors into death traps. Carlos's defensive positions created overlapping fields of fire that cut down attackers by the dozen. Jake fought from the front, his rifle singing its deadly song. Every shot counted. Every movement was calculated. He used every trick he had learned, every tactic that had kept him alive. The Korvath had superior numbers, but Task Force Reaper had something more valuable. Experience fighting when losing was the only logical outcome. The first wave broke. Then the second wave came, then the third. The Korvath couldn't believe what they were seeing. A handful of defenders holding against a full battalion. It wasn't possible. It wasn't logical. But it was happening. Vrax watched from his command ship, his rage growing with each failed assault. He had studied human tactics. He had prepared his troops. But nothing had prepared them for fighting warriors who simply refused to lose. He ordered another wave, this time leading it himself. Hours passed. The station filled with smoke and the smell of burnt metal. Ammunition ran low. Injuries mounted. But Task Force Reaper held. They gave ground slowly, fighting for every meter, making the Korvath pay in blood for every inch. Jake was everywhere, shoring up weak points, inspiring his people, showing them that victory was possible if they just kept fighting. Then, when things looked darkest, sensors picked up new contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Admiral Kane's Third Fleet had arrived, flanked by Drex warships and Ascari support vessels. Kale and Leora's testimonies had convinced their governments to join the fight. For the first time in the war, multiple species were fighting together against the Korvath. The United Fleet hit Vrax's forces from behind, catching them in a devastating crossfire. The Korvath, used to fighting isolated enemies, found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought. Their formation broke. Their ships started taking heavy damage. The tide had turned. But Vrax wasn't finished. He boarded Echo Station personally, determined to face Jake one final time. He fought through the defenders with savage fury, killing anyone who stood in his way. He wanted the Reaper, wanted to end this humiliation with his own hands. They met in the station's central command center. The room was scarred from battle, littered with debris and bodies. Vrax stood at one end, his armor scorched and dented. Jake stood at the other, exhausted and bleeding but still standing. They studied each other across the ruined room. Vrax expected taunts or threats. Instead, Jake lowered his rifle. He told Vrax this didn't have to end in more death. The galaxy had changed. Humanity wasn't prey anymore. The Korvath weren't invincible. They could keep killing each other or they could find a better way. Vrax laughed bitterly. He asked what made Jake think he would surrender to a human. Jake said he wasn't asking for surrender. He was offering a choice. Be the first Korvath to accept the new reality, or be the last to die defending the old one. Real strength wasn't about domination. It was about knowing when to adapt. For a long moment, Vrax stood frozen. His entire worldview was crumbling. Everything he believed about Korvath superiority, about the natural order of the galaxy, had been proven wrong. This human, this creature he had once considered weak prey, had destroyed his career, escaped his prison, and now stood offering mercy. Vrax lowered his weapon. It wasn't surrender, it was recognition. The galaxy had changed and he could either change with it or be left behind. He told Jake that other Korvath commanders would not be so wise. The Empire would keep fighting, but maybe eventually they would learn the same lesson he had learned today. The battle ended. Frax ordered his surviving forces to stand down. The united fleet held their fire. In the aftermath, representatives from multiple species gathered to discuss what had happened. The Battle of Echo Station had proven that cooperation could defeat the Korvath. It was the beginning of a real alliance. Admiral Kane offered Jake countless promotions and medals. He declined most of them. He remained with Task Force Reaper, but their mission changed. Instead of combat operations, they became instructors, teaching other species what they had learned: how to fight when outmatched, how to never give up, how to win against impossible odds. The Korvath Empire didn't surrender immediately. The war continued for years. But they never again underestimated humanity. They started negotiating, compromising, accepting that the galaxy had room for more than one power. Slowly, grudgingly, peace began to grow. Years later, Jake stood before a class of recruits from dozens of different species. They had come from across the galaxy to learn from the legend, young soldiers who wanted to understand what made humans so dangerous, so effective, so impossibly stubborn. Jake told them the truth. Humans weren't special because of genetics or technology. They were special because Earth had been trying to kill them for millions of years. Ice ages, plagues, predators, disasters. Everything on their home world wanted them dead. But humans survived by refusing to quit. He explained persistence hunting, how ancient humans chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. He told them about wars that lasted generations, about civilizations that rose from ashes, about a species that faced extinction dozens of times and survived every one. He taught them that every human carried the genetic memory of ancestors who had overcome impossible odds. The recruits listened carefully. Some were skeptical, some were inspired. All of them understood that humanity had brought something new to the galaxy. Not better technology or superior strength, but an attitude, a mindset that said no obstacle was too great, no enemy too powerful, no situation too hopeless. Kale and Leora stood at the back of the classroom, watching their friend teach. The reptilian warrior and the telepathic female had stayed with Jake through everything. They had become brothers and sisters in arms, bound by shared trauma and mutual respect. They had helped spread human tactics throughout their own civilizations. Sophie, Alex, and Carlos taught classes too, each sharing their expertise. The lessons they had learned through blood and fire were now shaping a new generation of warriors. Not warriors who fought for conquest, but warriors who protected the innocent and defended the weak. The name Reaper still echoed across the stars, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer just a title. It was a promise, a reminder that giving up was never an option. That fighting back was always possible, that humans and now their allies would never stop resisting tyranny. Jake watched his students practice, remembering his own journey, from capture to escape to legend. He had been broken, tortured, thrown into an arena to die. Instead, he had become a symbol that changed the galaxy. Not through superhuman abilities or advanced weapons, but through the simple human quality of refusing to accept defeat. Sometimes, late at night, he thought about his team. The men who had died in that first ambush, who never lived to see what their sacrifice had created. He hoped they would be proud of what humanity had become. Not conquerors, but teachers. Not destroyers, but builders of a better future. The galaxy was better now because one human had refused to die quietly. Because one Navy SEAL had turned a cage into a revolution. Because one man had shown the universe that humans were not prey, not primitives, not weak creatures to be dismissed. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were humanity. And the name Reaper would echo across the stars forever, not as a threat, but as a promise. A promise that no matter how dark things got, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, humans would never ever give up.